right, so we'll begin our lecture on the Gospel of Thomas. Let me just grab, okay, so the Gospel of Thomas, right? So I touched on some of it. I just want to give some brief, we actually covered a decent amount just in our conversation. And I think I love these kind of conversations. I'm glad you're all here. This is beautiful, everyone has, have different things they've read and that they might have more knowledge about. So that's what groups like this are all about. So it's really good to have this and have you all here. So to touch on the a little bit of the historical context. So first I wanted to just I've talked about this in other lectures. So basically, I want to make it real simple. This sort of Judaism in the northern part of Judea, and you also had as you may have heard, another discovery in the late 40s was the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? So those were the Essenes, and they were an ascetic group that lived in the northern, Judea area near the Dead Sea, and they also found writings from them, and that helped us to give some historical context to people like James the Just is referenced. I think the Spouter Lies, they didn't necessarily like Paul, but there was also James the Just and different figures that were mentioned. But anyhow, without going off on too much of a tangent, there was also that type of Messianic Judaism was much different. It was much more about, your inner life of prayer, your connection with Abba or God, or the divine, the Mother, Father, and it was also how you lived your life, good works and that sort of thing as well. How your the outer life as well, right? So, and then the rituals were more not in the temple; they were more home or transportable rituals. For example, as I mentioned before, there was a sacrifice of bread and wine that goes back to the order of Melchizedek. You can find that in the Old Testament's referenced as well. So that form of Judaism, there wasn't the temple animal sacrifice. Also, as I said, by that point, the majority of the people of Judea, of the kingdoms, did not like the temple. They saw it as repressive. It was repressive, to women, to, the disabled. It was all about like acquiring, different things and status. So it became very much in opposition. But St. James, who represented that Messianic tradition as well, was liked by the people, and he was able to go into the temple and do the rituals as well. So just to give you some context with that and where this comes from. So the Gospel of Thomas, right? We have the canonical Gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? Those are not like primary sources, right? They were, like, as I was saying before, maybe Luke went out, different parts of the Mediterranean, had different, different followings. And then maybe one of those people's children ended up keeping those words, documenting them, and then a couple generations later, that becomes the Gospel of Mark, right? So Mark didn't actually write Mark, Luke didn't actually write Luke. So, and we even see with the Gospel of John was probably the youngest disciple. He was only like 12 years old. That's why he was able to go at the foot of the crucifixion. They would only let children there or women, right? These were just, those were the traditions of the time. So that's why that Gospel is written like anywhere from like 90 AD to maybe 120 or so, right?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Again, just reading on the way here, I read that the synoptical gospels are considered the first three: Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And apparently Matthew has everything, and then Mark and Luke take a lot from Matthew and add some of their own.
Mark is the first gospel
Is it
was
Mark?
probably written like
Okay,
50
Yeah,
I got
that's
it wrong.
correct.
Okay, so
No, you're
Mark
right.
is the one, and Matthew and Luke take some different percentage of Matthew, of the other two, have Mark and then add-ons. And then John comes along as the fourth gospel, which is the canonical gospel.
Yeah.
Why is John different?
It's more Gnostic.
Yeah, it's more Gnostic. It was written by it was written much later, right? So it's written like 50 years after the at least. Whereas Mark is probably 60 some odd AD. Whereas we know that from a scholarly consensus and and research, primary sources, the writings of Thomas, because what they did was they extrapolated all this, the sayings, and Thomas, those original sayings are the earliest. Like that's a consensus now. Like Elaine Pagels would agree. Yeah.
Some put Thomas as early as 50 AD.
Yeah, it's definitely it's definitely one of the earliest, and it's different because it's just the sayings, and it was probably that inner circle of disciples that was, because as it even says in the canonical Gospels, to the masses he spoke in parable, but he spoke plainly to his inner circle of disciples, right? Like we just read. Thomas, he says, who am I? It's very different than the canonical Gospels. He goes, who am I like? Well, oh, you're like a righteous teacher. You're like a wise angel. And then he takes Thomas aside, and they can't say, you know why they can't say the words? Because God is within us. That was blasphemy at the time. We're all God. Now, not God in an ego sense. We have a flawed mind, and if we don't deal with our trauma and our psychological issues, we can do subconsciously do some really messed up things. Yeah.
He told the story, and somebody said 3 words to them, and then he comes back and says, if I told you what they said, you'd probably stone me. He probably said, you are God.
Yeah, probably something you're deified. We're all God, right?
Or multidimensional.
Yeah, we're multidimensional, but not God in an ego sense, or I'm God, I'm over you. It's we're all God, but we can also have the potential to do really evil things, even if we don't consciously know it, right? We could have guilt, shame, and fear, repress ourselves, and we see in the world when people have guilt, shame, and fear, they can create their family patterns of abuse because and I could go into a whole thing about that. I'm also a certified hypnotist, so I could talk all about trauma. But anyhow, for the sake of this, we're kind of focusing just more on the spiritual part. But yeah, we live in a flawed world. I mean, no one can deny that, right? We live in that's putting it nicely, right? We live in a flawed world, and that's why even you take humanity out of it, look at natural disasters and disease, and can create a lot of suffering for animals, for people. So that's part of Gnosticism, having that radical acceptance of how things are, not a new age. Again, I don't like to just throw out the word new age in a bad. New age is a very umbrella term, but we know that dark side of like The Secret, and people weren't thinking right. That's why famines happen and all these terrible things, right? So that's not a good, it's a very dualistic way of thinking. Whereas the Gnostic view is looking at the whole thing, the divinity here, how we can experience the resurrection and divinity now, and the dark side of life and reality as well. But we're in those, right? Those opposites, right? At least in this, where we come from a wholeness, the pleroma, and we're put into this world when we go back to that fullness. But, the Gnostic point of view is that we can experience the resurrection here and now. We're not waiting, right? It's not like the carrot in front of the horse that a lot of fundamentalist Christianity does. We have all the answers. It's simple. Just believe these 3 words, right? And we'll hold it. No, like you have to go out, individuate, and no one can tell you. That's the difficult thing about the Gnostic path. No one can say, all right, do these 3 things. Yeah, I could suggest, I'm very fluent in yoga and pranayama techniques, all sorts of yoga. But people have to find that for themselves. Maybe this certain yoga technique works. Maybe meditation. Maybe the Blessed Sacrament. This works for me, right? It might not work for everyone, right? So we're very honest about the subjectivity of spiritual practice, right? There's very powerful spiritual practices, but also if someone has a block in their mind and they're like, I don't like that. I don't like it. Maybe they had a bad experience. Whatever it is, they're not going to get all that divine energy from it and that transforming energy. So there's a lot with people feeling whatever that is they're comfortable doing, whether it's Sufi dancing or yoga or meditation or the Eucharist. People have to sort of find that for themselves. So that's sort of there aren't easy answers with you're not. There's a reason why you go to any of these mainstream churches. There's tons of people. They have a huge infrastructure because years of colonialism and forcing people to their religions, they just have that momentum. I hate to say it, but that's true. And I'm not disparaging, like there's mainstream Episcopal, Catholic, they do charities and good. So I'm not disparaging that either. It's complex. It's not a cut or dry either sort of thing. Okay, so we sort of gave some historical context of where that type of Judaism was, the Messianic Judaism that Jesus came out of. There was also his cousin, James the Just, like I said, was able to go into the temple. But again, James would have still been more about the law as well, but still that Messianic Judaism. John the Baptist was probably maybe a Nicaean, broke away, had his own following there, a baptismal, thing where baptism was was not as in Christianity became more of an initiation, a one-time thing. But the Manichaeans, has anyone heard of the Manichaeans?
Manichaeans, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the Manichaeans were a group that ended up, they were the followers of John the Baptist, and they still consider him the origin, right? But they ended up in like which
Iraq.
now Iraq, yeah, and then unfortunately the whole Iraq war, which was terrible, and they had to flee because of that. Because when you cause all this chaos, then people start getting scapegoated. They were one of the religious ethnic minorities. They started getting scapegoated. They had to flee. So there's a big group in Texas. They use the rivers there. It's beautiful to see that. You can go on and see the baptism, but they use baptism kind of like we use like the Eucharist. They do it once a week, or it's a continual practice.
Something at the Rockaways.
Oh, really?
I don't know what it was. I just
Oh.
saw somebody leading a bunch of people into the water.
Okay, so they wouldn't do it in salt water. It has to be living waters, like the River Jordan. So,
Okay, so
yeah, so they might have just been like Baptist or some maybe Christian. I don't know, but
Yeah, I didn't know.
interesting. Yeah, but they wear all white, and that's probably how John the Baptist wore white. So to give some context of this world where the Gospel of Thomas came out of,
I
right?
thought he wore goat hair.
Oh, what's that?
I thought he wore goat hair, right? Wasn't he like living in
Yeah, there's that too. Some say that's not true, but I don't know. I haven't really delved into it as much. But yeah, that was sort of the world this came out of. But we see very much in the Gospel of Thomas, it's very different because it's the sayings, it's question and answer, right? And then there's some layers to it. It's also believed that, and even Louis Kaiser, this is his theory, and some of that, in other words, the version we had came out for a messianic group that was part of the Jesus movement, but they were an aesthetic group of men that were aesthetic, living in more of like a monastic life, and they were the ones that the version we got was the one. So he has some theories that some of this might be some things that they put in. My whole thing is, you know what? If anyone here wrote those words yesterday, they still point to the same truth, right? So it doesn't in the Gnostic path. History is giving us context. It's removing some of the social conditioning and sort of brainwashing from fundamentalism, but it's really not it's not based on history. It's based on the here and now, right? So our inner experience of the heart, and that's if you look at the Gnostic cross, it's not the crucifixion, it's the spirit, this line, and this is history or time and space. So it's breaking through to us here and now through history. So that's very different than the Catholic churches or the Calvinist view of these symbols and such as well, right? So just to give some nuance and differentiation. Well, let us go now into the Hellenistic world, right? So Judea, that whole area borders North Africa. You got the Red Sea there. So the earliest Christianity is spread along the Red Sea. So if you go down, and people don't do this, you take the Red Sea, you got Arabia here, you got Egypt. People could go back and forth. So like even in, has anyone ever seen, they sort of show this, another Gnostic-y kind of movie. I remember people when I was a kid were trying to ban it in my town, was Martin Scorsese, and I loved it, Last Temptation of Christ. Anyone see that?
Yeah, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah, William Dafoe, 1987. Yeah, I was like 12, but I loved that movie because I was just like, yeah, that's real, William Dafoe plays Jesus, but it's based on the works of Nikos Kazantzakis, who is a Greek philosopher in the turn of the century. And you can read it was originally a book and then it became a movie, but it's a little bit more Gnostic-y kind of Jesus, But anyhow, the reason why I bring that up, they show during Passover where all the people they're coming, so they could come back and forth. So people could come the deep part of the Red Sea and come up. So that's where we get the whole story of Solomon and Bathsheba, right? So Solomon was the king of Judea, and then he married Bathsheba, and there's all stories about how there was Judaism and Ethiopia and all that too. But just the reason there was historical precedence for that because you just go up and down the Red Sea. So I'm just trying to give some context of how Christianity, and this was before colonialism, how it actually kind of spread and why we have. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the people in India and Kerala call themselves the Thomasinian Christians.
Yes, exactly. That was, I'm going to.
Supposedly, okay.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So Thomas, no, actually, you remind, because I might have missed that. Thomas,
Sorry.
oh, go ahead,
before
yeah.
you go into it, what's the name of the movie?
The Last Temptation of Christ, Martin Scorsese. It's not one of his, like, he also did Kundun, which was about the Dalai Lama. Those were more movies that, like, they had.
Barbara Hershey plays Mary Magdalene,
Yup.
and they make her into a prostitute.
Yeah, that wasn't. Yeah, that wasn't good. I'm not saying it's all good.
That
Yeah.
was not true.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. So I'm not saying it's historically accurate or even,
Okay.
you know, but it's interesting. It'll give you a different kind of view. And what was I going to say? So anyhow, yes, Thomas. Okay, so these apostles went to different parts of the Mediterranean, but I'm glad you brought that up because Thomas went east to India. So Kerala, India, which is in the southwest of India. So they're all Catholic there. And even they have the Tomb of Thomas, and even the Catholic Church in Norwalk, Connecticut, where I grew up, St. Jerome's. The priest there for many years was from Kerala, India. And he ended up like leaving the priesthood and wrote some other sort of like holistic, anyhow, it's a whole other thing. But so Kerala, India has that whole Thomasean tradition. And another work that came out of that is the Hymn of the Pearl. And that's a very long, that's not that long, but it's a whole mythical story. So it doesn't have a Christology at all, but it's all about this prince and he leaves his land, which he goes down into Egypt, but Egypt is symbolic of the material world, and he has to find the pearl. So that's another Thomasean tradition as well, just like the Gospel of Thomas as well. So so you had these different flavors of these different apostles going out, right? You had things, it got more Hellenized, right? St. Paul was able to bring in the dying and resurrecting God and interpolate that into it as well. So you had these, but the difference is, again, I want to emphasize the question and answer. And actually, let me just grab, let's see if I can grab, I have it here. I think I have it here. Anyhow, I'll say that. Anyhow, I thought I had some words there, but I want to just reference, like for example, the saying, is the kingdom, they're talking about where do we find the kingdom, right? In the Gospel of Thomas, and Jesus said, if you look into the sky, the birds will precede you. If you look into the sea, the fish will precede you, right? But the kingdom is within you and it's outside of you. So that's also very hermetic, right? Hermeticism, it's all reconciling opposites, as within. We even said it in the Mass, as within, so without, as above, so below. So that's another aspect of Gnosticism. You're reconciling opposites, but that's also helping you build a chalice, right? So another thing, the chalice, I think it'll be good if I show this because this is really esoteric. So, right, just like we receive the holy, it becomes consecrated, the bread and wine, right? But to hold that, just like our psyche, we need, our minds need to have the right sort of juxtaposition to hold that grace that comes into us. So our psyches are the chalice, right? So that's the psychological part. We do our work, we do our psychological work. We try to, like as Jung talked about, our shadows. We try to work on the shadows. And as it's written in the New Testament, you don't put new wine in an old wine sack. So the wine sack's the psyche, right? And then the wine is the grace that we receive, right? And that can be through ritual, can be through life experience, right? So I just wanted to point that out, that that's so much when we talk about body, mind, and spirit. There's people's physical needs, of course, need to be met, medicine and food and all that. Of course, that's very important. Of course, can cause a lot of suffering without that. But there's the mental aspect, right? So the Gnostics will also address, that's why Carl Jung is considered a great Gnostic. Many consider him a Gnostic prophet because he had a psychological approach with archetypes. And I think even now, personally, I think I've done a lot of work on trauma and studying that. I think that's an important part because what happens is I've met a lot of people who have beautiful mystical experience. They have tons of gnosis, but their shadow is not, they can be narcissistic and not so nice, but and as it's written in the Gospel of Philip, right? It's better if we have a pearl is still a pearl if it's in the mud or if it's wrapped in balm oil, scented balm oil, right? But wouldn't it be nicer if it's in the balm oil and we don't have all, so my thing is, the body, mind, spirit, how those three, just like the tree of life are stacked in proportion properly, right? But having this grace, having the gnosis, allows us to go into the world and deal with all the challenges. I could say for myself, stuff that I would have freaked out at, 15, 10, 20 years ago, I would, it's like nothing now because you do the work, the great work. So this is a term of the esoteric especially in Europe later on, Masons and Martinists, they would use the term the great work of spiritual transformation. So doing that work yourself, prayer, meditation, study, all these spiritual things to make that link with the divine, God, a higher power, whatever we call it. We have
Christ consciousness.
Yeah, expand our consciousness, right? So doing that work daily, right? And that could be a million things. It could be just saying, I have these beads, I say a quick prayer on even just reaching in, it just sort of centers me. I do my breath work in the morning, but we all have to find these things for ourselves, right? Some people it's taking that jog in the morning and,
I feel like a big important part is integrating the shadow. I know you mentioned it.
True.
But I cannot emphasize so much. Like it's one of the things I find that a lot of spirituality and even religion miss out a lot on, the integration part of it. And so in the phase of each integration and transformation and how he evolves and stuff like that. So I think with that, the supportive tools as meditation, prayer and stuff like that are great things. But I think what a lot of communities and religious spaces miss out more is that part.
True. Yeah, it's very true. And there's some good, Jung did a lot on it, but I think there's even, and people are going to say, oh, you're getting out of this, but I think it's very, like I was saying, the psyche and how that's that chalice. And then there's the other end of it. There's people who do all the work, the psychological work, but they have an empty chalice. So I think it's good, analogy to look at. So that's very good. And I think people like Gabor Mate are doing excellent work on trauma. There's work of Peter Levine, childhood trauma, understanding that. And as a certified hypnotist, I really understand suggestion and how innocent children are. Like what you say, they're going to believe anything you say. They're innocent. And that little inner child stays with us. So our parents are always right, no matter what. That's what a child will always think, no matter if they're abused, right? And I think that's an important aspect to understand. And the whole the 10 Commandments, a lot of them we could just chuck them out, right? Okay, our parents, yeah, of course, if we have a relationship, but are they filling the vessel? Are we filling the vessel for them? A sibling, you know what I'm saying? So that's what I think Gnosticism is getting at. It's like all these worldly forms of a family structure. No, of course you have children, you have to be responsible, but a lot of people have children because that's what society tells them, and then they abuse their children and they project all their inaccuracies. Because they're narcissistic, they're actually jealous of their children. So that happens too. So you're absolutely right. Like understanding that our shadow elements, and so the more we can do that, the less we're going to project. And even our negative thoughts, I let that come up because you know why? If I don't do that, that's going to come subconsciously on someone, right? Someone's going to step on or something like, and I see that with people. It's like, yeah. So if I have a negative thought about someone, I just have it, right? And there's usually a reason why. And I think, well, why did I? Even just that breaking that down. Why did I have that thought? Is there a sixth sense, like something? But just thinking at it, letting that energy come up, the sadness, the anger, taking a breath, feeling it in our body. You're expelling it. And I'm not trying to be vulgar, but it's sort of like we go to the bathroom, right? And we don't think about it. It's like, oh, we have to go to the bathroom. But imagine with our I'm ashamed. I thought that horrible thought about that. It's like, no, think it, let it go. Don't be ashamed of it because that's how our psyche and physiology works.
Meeting it with curiosity.
Yeah, exactly.
And leaning into it instead of let fear distort your vision.
Exactly. Yeah. So feeling the emotion, but if we feel it. And we feel the energy of it. Like sometimes if I'm angry, take a breath. Ooh, that's energizing. It's an energy. Oh, I'm a little sad. That's a calming energy. It's watery, right? So I think, being in touch with our emotions, where we feel it in the body even, that's a big thing. Ooh, did I feel that in the shoulders? Chest? We're already processing that. And we're doing trauma work actually on a very micro level, right? So it's very important. And then we're not going to project that on someone and then just have these narcissistic patterns. Then we have kids and take that out on them and they take it out on their kids. And so this self-analysis, you're absolutely right. The shadow work is really important. And I think, the Gospel of Thomas does sort of talk about that. I know, and Carl Jung especially talked about the shadow and the dark, and that's why the Red Book, it had a lot of dark things in it, but these were things from his subconscious that were coming up, and and such as well. But yeah, that's it. And in the Gospel of, I think we had it in today's Gospel, the Gospel of Philip, dark and light, life and death are siblings of one another. They're and that's the world we live in. We have to reconcile these sort of opposites.
Are you a big believer that it doesn't really matter the messenger, it matters the message itself? Like a lot of times we may stay stuck as to who is delivering the message and not what the message entails.
Exactly. That's a very good point. Exactly. Like in Gnosticism, it's like, I'll be honest, if someone came and they had like all the best archaeologists and scientists and professors and and they said they're definitively, we know there was no Jesus, it was all myth, it wouldn't change a darn thing to me because it's all in here, right? And at the end of the day, that's all it really can be. Even if it happened historically, it's what's pointing towards these spiritual realities that ultimately we cannot put words on, right? So yeah, so like that's why Alan Watts always, that quote I always use, the map isn't the destination, the menu isn't the meal, as well.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, sure.
Is there some quotes or some in the Gospel of Thomas that you particularly like or want to speak about?
Yeah, sure.
Is that something we're gonna get
The one I just mentioned, I was actually breaking down, and I really welcome your questions, and it's great. I think I got off on a tangent, but so where can we find, the disciples ask him, where shall we find the kingdom? Is the kingdom in the sky? No, it's not in the sky. The birds will precede you. Is it in the sea? Will then the fish will precede you, right? Well, rather the kingdom is within you and it's outside of you, right? So we have to find it in here, because we don't find it in here, we're not going to find it anywhere else, right? And then, like for me, everything starts, like I see children playing, I see families. I'm just partaking in the joy of seeing these people enjoying themselves. There's no ownership of anything. I may never see those people again, right? So that's very different than the sort of possessing world. Oh, you got to have this status and this job and this money, and you got to have this many kids and all these things that society throws on us. There is just a sheer, and I will talk to another one when I just mentioned children. I just became a teacher in Jersey City, right? I had to get the hell out of the corporate world, right? Because it was going to crap with the economy now, right? Every 3 years there's layoffs. And the children are beautiful. These kids are great, and I see the beauty and divinity in them, right? And they have to be their kids have to be reprimanded and showed what to do. But there's also this saying from the Gospel of Thomas, the kingdom is like little children being suckled, by their mother. They're being fed. And then he says, well, how shall we enter the kingdom, as little children, so it's asking, it's seeing that innocence. Yeah, children are, right, like the child comes from, they're just born and they're coming from their source. So they're very close to source, right? That's why they're so innocent. They come from the pleroma, just like someone maybe older and very old in age, they might wake up and they're at the end of their life. Go back to the pleroma,
I just have to share this. So I sit in my neighborhood playground, and the nannies bring the little children to play, and they're little ones, they're innocent. And you can almost see, by the time they get to a certain age, I don't know, maybe it's 2 or 3, I don't know, they're already, it's my toy.
Yeah.
But the little ones, everything is just a smile, an adventure, and they fall and they cry, and the next minute they're laughing. It's such child development must be, I don't know if you're a therapist or psychologist, but child development and how, we come in so beautiful and innocent, and then all these things are laid on the child. It's terrible.
Yeah, that's why if people don't do their trauma work and then they try to bring kids into the world, it's a disaster, right? And they're usually having the kids because they were told, you got to have kids,
Most parents are just doing it because it was laid on them.
Yeah, exactly.
They're just passing it on.
Yeah. And then it's like, well, I'll use 2 quotes. I'll take another one from the Gospel of Thomas. Now, another thing to understand about, these were originally spoken and written in the Franca lingua of Jerusalem, Judea at the time, which was Aramaic. Has anyone heard the language Aramaic?
Yes.
Okay. So Aramaic was the forerunner. So within 200 years, you had Arabic, right? So let me think. Shalom and salam, right? They're very similar words. They both mean peace, right? But yes, you had Aramaic, then you had Arabic. But just like in Europe at one time, you had, before Vatican II, you had the local language of, oh, I speak Italian, I speak Polish. But when you went to Mass, everyone was speaking Latin. And that was the same at this time of Jesus. For ritual, they were using more of the older Hebrew, but then amongst themselves, they were speaking Aramaic. But Aramaic is a very hyperbolic language, right?
What is hyperbolic?
I'll give you an example. The Gospel of Thomas, right? Or just the one we like, stones will come at you, and right. So it's using very harsh language.
Hyperbole, exaggeration?
Yeah, like you're exaggerating to make a point. So like in the Gospel of Thomas, one of the disciples says, how shall we fast? How shall we pray? How shall we give alms? And Jesus says, don't lie and don't do what you hate. Very different than fundamentalist Christianity, right? It's all laid out for you. You got to do this. You got to believe these words. You got to do these things. Check off the boxes. But what's going on in here? You're still empty, right? You know, it's
was that said that way? So the person, so it could be an individual experience versus somebody telling you exactly what to do. That's how I'm seeing it once you mention it, because it gives you, like, you are the person who determines what that is for yourself.
Exactly.
Because it's part of your alignment, let's say.
Yeah, and it's not even like all these moments we're watching the sunset or you see kids playing. It's like, how do we define? I need a friend, help, like a friend you can depend, like all these beautiful little, but our society, it's worthless, but these are the eternal things. These are the true things, right? Of course, we need to meet people's material conditions and, medicine, of course, but the world doesn't address those, obviously doesn't address those things either, but the spiritual, even mainstream spirituality does not address, it's the inner life, our inner life. And again, the person, and as anyone, I've had this experience too. There's someone years ago I used to see at my gym all the time, and they would walk in. There was always like this peaceful feeling, and they were just so nice. And I was like, I don't know if they practiced any spirituality or what, but there was their energy you could just sort of, and I'm like that with people. People walk, and sometimes it's the opposite. I'm like, I can't define this, but my sixth sense, my spidey sense is something's off too. But yeah, you are absolutely right. It's your own experience and individuating too. And Carl Jung talked about that. So I don't want to get, individuation could be like it's, and gnosis, they overlap like greatly. So in other words, the individuation could be like, oh, like this job just isn't, I can't do this anymore. It doesn't align with me. And it starts to get worse. Like when you start it, you're like, all right, it pays the bills. Like, of course, like I was in sales for 25 years. It got more and more exploitive. I can go and tell you the stories and stories, they keep laying off the best people, bring in people, pay them less, And anyhow, and there's a point where it just gets worse and you're like, I got to get out of here. And that's usually the individualization. Like you find, like I'm teaching now with these kids, it doesn't pay as well. It's not as, it's tiring. I'm tired at the end of the day, but their smiles and showing them how to do a math problem and just giving them that little bit of encouragement. Like to me, that motivates me,